Hello everyone and welcome back to English with Kayleigh. In today's video we are going to analyse Ted Hughes' Snowdrop. So here is Snowdrop by Ted Hughes. Now is the globe shrunk tight round the mouse's dulled wintering heart. Weasel and crow, as if moulded in brass, move through an outer darkness, not in their right minds, with the other deaths. She, too, pursues her end, brutal as the stars of this month, her pale head heavy as metal. Okay, so what is the summary? What can we see? Well, in the moment we see the world tightly gripping the heart of a mouse. Its beating slows and becomes quieter and quieter as it prepares for a difficult winter. Then we see the other animals, weasels and crows, and they seem metal-like as they move heavily through the bitter landscape alongside the other dying things and animals. Then we see the flower, the subject of the poem. She is pursuing her goal of blooming despite the brutal force of nature. But like the animals, she seems made of metal, drooping and hanging heavy. So the themes that we see in Snowdrop is first the brutality of nature, and then we also see the theme of survival, or very much the struggle to survive in external factors. Okay, so I've split my analysis into certain lines. So first of all, we're going to look at lines 1 and 2. Now is the globe shrunk tight round the mouse's dulled wintering heart. So straight away we get a tone that is very chilly and bleak, and we move from this zoomed out approach of looking at the world, and then we zoom into this small tiny mouse and the difficulties that it's facing. And this really reflects the act of the shrinking and the gripping tightly, almost with an image of a hand trying to strangle the life out of something. So a very, very bleak tone to start the poem. So we have enjambment here. Again, this reflects that constriction, that tightening around the heart. And we get this idea that nature is not going to let up anytime soon. Then we see the dulled wintering heart. So we see a mouse preparing for the harsh winter. We almost see its heart rate slowing down. It's become dulled. It's become mute. In that all that matters now is the act of survival. We see a lot of assonance of the ow sound throughout the first two lines. It's very intense, and these long sounds really add to that intensity, and it almost mimics the contracting of the world through the vocal sound, and almost the mouse's cry out and response to the pain that's been inflicted. So we see here a rhyming couplet. This is actually slant rhyme. It's half rhyme in that it doesn't rhyme fully, but we have the t sound, tight, heart. So again, this dulled rhyme really reflects the hearts of the animals, not only the mouse, but throughout the poem, and how they face the harsh winter and the cruelty of nature. Then we move on to lines 3, 4 and 5, and now the perspective of the poem changes and we move to see other animals, and we are introduced to weasel and crow. So I think the omission of an article of a or the here suggests that this can be generalized to a large number of animals, not just the specific weasel and crow that are mentioned within the poem. So it is potentially about animals in general and what they are having to face during this complex time. We have a simile here, as if molded in brass. So when I teach this to my students, I always ask the question, how do we normally describe birds? We would describe them as soaring. We would look at the semantic field of light and feathers, floating. But here we have a very stark contrast. And this shows how the winter has taken a heavy toll on the animals. The weather has almost transformed them into, statues and not actually living organisms on the earth. And then we see they move through an outer darkness. So obviously we have to think about the connotations of darkness. We get a sense of danger, of the unknown, especially the fact that it's outer, it's this external force and factor that is causing them this fear. But it links very, very beautifully into the next line that says, not in their right minds. And I think this really juxtaposes that outer darkness. And now we see their internal darkness, because the mental state of the creatures has been impacted. We see that they are confused, they are unwell. So we see what and how the external world has impacted the individual. Then in line 6, we see the subject of the poem being introduced. So first of all, we have with the other deaths. So this is obviously a continuation of the previous line. So we see here that the weasel and crow are described as good as dead, almost emphasized by the others, the other that are alluded to in this sentence. Deaths, it's almost presented as a tangible thing that is present, almost like ghosts among the dead. So the death of the animals in nature is obviously very evident in winter, and perhaps it consumes the animals like the mouse, who are solely focused on surviving. Then we have a caesura. So we have this eerie pause here to reflect on the death and destruction that's been caused by the winter. But it also serves as a pause to a change in tone and a change in topic, where we are introduced to she. So here we move to the female figure, and as we know, this is the Snowdrop. And we see here the word to shows that she has the same goals as the animals. So it is to survive and to bloom. However, there's a contrast between the character and the animals. The word pursues, it seems very calculated and focused. She, unlike the other animals, is not simply just continuing and carrying on and, trudging through life. She is still there and very focused on her goal. What's important is this is the longer sentence, and this of course emphasizes the importance of the character that we've been introduced to, but also with this idea of pursuing her end, pursuing survival. It is a journey, and she is prepared and calculated and ready to face it. Line 7 and 8 goes in to describe the snowdrop in more detail, and she's described as brutal as the stars of this month. So we get this idea that she is as tough as the brutal winter. We see alliteration in the last line, her head heavy as metal. So the alliteration of the H sound and the assonance of the E emphasizes the grueling nature. It's almost as if she is sighing or huffing in response to the heaviness of the task of survival. And then the final word, we see metal, and this mirrors line 3, the brass. However, this contrasts the animals. And one of my students made a very good point in looking at brass and metal and the components that make up the material, and that metal seems much stronger than almost a flimsy brass. So here, but we see the difference is that for her strength lies and her survival lies in being still and being able to bloom. And of course, we know that a snowdrop is a flower that blooms in winter. So she stands strong and she doesn't move. So the flower is obviously personified, and she juxtaposes the dying animals that we met earlier in the poem. Her physical appearance is also juxtaposed in regard to her strength and resilience, and that may be one of Hughes's message about survival and strength and resilience in overcoming these complexities. An alternative interpretation of the poem could be in reference to an actual person or metaphorical description of a woman and her personality and learned nature. She survives because she's able to mold herself to act more like the nature around her. She has created this brutality in response. And it could also be a nod to reproduction and rebirth and growth. We see the white snowdrop and its pale, heavy head emerging. So in that way, it could also be about the strength of a woman as she works to reproduce. We also have an important point about the stars of the month being linked to one's horoscope. As we know, Ted Hughes was very much into astrology and into the idea of how a person's fate is predetermined when they are born. So here we get this idea that the flower, the month when it bloomed, she was almost born and predetermined to survive. However, since the poem is without a conclusive end, we're actually left on almost a bit of a cliffhanger, because we don't actually know if they manage to persevere and pervade the harsh winter. Do they survive? Form, meter and rhyme then. So obviously the form, we have one stanza made up of 8 lines, which is called an octave. So this very much reflects the constricting like nature of winter and that physical description of the world shrinking. Ted Hughes manages to keep it very compact, much like the struggles that the animals are facing. For meter, no meter is used, and meter is usually used to allow a poet to express predictability. But of course, in this poem, the lack of meter just shows the unrelentless nature of the world. Rhyme, we do have rhyme, which we mentioned before, but it is slant rhyme or half rhyme. And as I said, this is very subtle. This is almost dulled, much like the animals in the winter. So now I'm going to share with you an essay question. This is a question that you could potentially use to practice in knowing how to respond to Ted Hughes' question. This is based off of the Cambridge CAIE exam questions. So I've written here, how is the theme of survival explored in Snowdrop? So if you have some ideas for this essay question and you'd like to pop them in the comments below, I'd be happy to check them out and give you some feedback. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you found the video useful. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.